Shaken by the turmoil of World War I, hatred flared among bitter European nations. With the rise of Nazi Germany, leaders took advantage of persistent anti-Semitism that already lingered throughout Europe. Thus, World War II began as their government turned to the exploitation of Jewish citizens to relieve their political defeats. As persecution swept across Europe, it plagued each country. Jewish populations were being massacred. Yet instead of taking action, terror halted many of these nations from upholding their duties to protect their citizens' rights. As European nations remained passive in the face of the Holocaust, one man refused to accept neutrality as an option. Raoul Wallenberg, a Swedish diplomat, humanitarian, and hero, saved more than 100,000 lives during the Holocaust. However, an important part of his story remains unsung: his fate, which remains a mystery to this day. Raoul Wallenberg was born on August 4, 1912, in Stockholm, Sweden. Raised by a family of wealthy bankers, Raoul was taught from a young age how to become successful. Mentored by his grandfather, Gustav Wallenberg, he was encouraged to expand his horizons and perspective by traveling the world. After studying in the United States at the University of Michigan, Wallenberg continued to pursue the idea of becoming a banker. In 1936, he began as an apprentice at a branch office of a Dutch bank in Haifa, Palestine. There, he met Jewish refugees who fled from growing anti-Semitism in Germany after Adolf Hitler assumed power. As Hitler's dictatorship spread across Nazi Germany, anti-Semitism grew, and in 1939, World War II began. Throughout the war, the United States was pressed to act against Jewish exploitation. After 5 long years of war, on January 22, 1944, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9417, establishing the War Refugee Board. This government agency began to recruit individuals from neutral countries, funding their missions and granting them diplomatic rights to lead operations in European nations.
So what's one of the tragedies of the War Refugee Board? That it was a very small organization and underfunded, but nonetheless heroic in what it accomplished despite those obstacles.
Hungary had become an epicenter for Jewish persecution. In 1944 alone, approximately 450,000 Jewish people were deported and sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau, 90% of whom were murdered upon arrival. Recognizing the necessity to save the remaining population of 350,000 Jews, the War Refugee Board asked 5 neutral European countries with embassies in Hungary to consider increasing their diplomatic staff. After months of silence, Sweden responded to this desperate call. They allowed Ivar Olsson, an OSS agent and the board's representative, to choose a Swedish diplomat to travel to Hungary. To this day, the full story of how Raoul Wallenberg was selected for this role is still not fully known. However, it is clear that through his business and family connections, Raoul Wallenberg met Ivar Olsson and was offered the opportunity. Because of Raoul's knowledge in 6 languages, international experience, and exposure to the devastation caused by Jewish persecution, he did not hesitate to try and save as many lives as possible.
And when he got the question, he did not hesitate. He really wanted to go and try to make the best he could. So he was really anxious to get going.
Wallenberg arrived in Budapest, Hungary's capital, on July 9, 1944. He immediately collaborated with other humanitarians and observed how they utilized their rights to distribute protective papers to refugees. With this idea, Wallenberg created a new protective passport called the Schutzpass. These passes placed the holder under the protection of neutral powers, marked with a stamp of the Royal Swedish Embassy to convince the Nazis of its legal authenticity.
He used, as you said, his diplomatic rights. He used his diplomatic position with the okay, if you can say so, from the Swedish government to issue these safety passports that he did thousands of, that were so professionally done that they were saving a lot more Jews than the ordinary. There had been like more amateurish safety papers in Budapest before, but he really issued papers that looked like real passports.
Wallenberg simultaneously utilized funds from the War Refugee Board to rent 32 buildings to use as safe houses in Budapest. Under the protection of the Swedish legation, they ensured temporary security for refugees fleeing Nazi persecution. To house citizens, he recruited men who would help guide individuals to safe houses.
These brave Jewish men would put on Nazi uniforms that they were able to capture somehow. And they would go around Budapest, knock on Jewish doors and yell, "Heraus, Heraus, get out, get out." And they would take them to the safe havens that Wallenberg provided.
On October 15th, 1944, the Arrow Cross, a fascist Hungarian group, organized a coup. This military operation was ordered by Hitler to demote Hungary's regent, Miklos Horthy, after discovering that he had been conducting armistice negotiations with advancing Soviet troops who tried to liberate Hungary. At the same time, death marches were organized and enforced by Adolf Eichmann, a high-ranking Nazi official, and the Arrow Cross, forcing hundreds of thousands of Jewish individuals to march 125 miles to the Austria-Hungary border. Thousands succumbed to the cold, starvation, and exhaustion. Yet, amid this terror, Raoul Wallenberg aided these prisoners with provisions and supplies.
He set up a task force called the Schutzling Protocol. Some of these people, despite their documents, which were supposed to prevent them from being deported, some of them were taken away anyway. And the Schutzling Protocol, the purpose was to bring back the ones who disappeared, to find them and bring them back.
On November 29, 1944, the central Budapest ghetto was established. Located on the eastern side of the capital, Pest, 70,000 Jewish individuals were detained in appalling conditions. Due to the rising loss of Nazi powers, a last effort was made by Eichmann and the Arrow Cross to massacre all of the inhabitants within. Wallenberg, with the help of Hungarians and the Jewish Council, was able to foil this plot. Using his diplomatic rights of immunity, he resorted to unorthodox negotiations with Eichmann to secure the release of all 70,000 Jews. Fortunately, the liberation of many camps and ghettos began in early 1945. The Soviet Union progressively liberated the central ghetto in Pest on January 17th. Wallenberg and other diplomats from the Swedish embassy hid on the western side of the capital, which had not been freed. There, the Royal Swedish Embassy offered him to return to Sweden and announce his mission as a success, but he declined. Raoul Wallenberg marched to Pest, hoping the Soviet Union would further aid him in his new effort to rebuild Hungary. Unbeknownst to him, the Soviet Union had heard of his rescue efforts, along with his contacts with the US government and prominent Nazi officers. With this limited knowledge, the Soviet Union accused Wallenberg of espionage, and an arrest order was issued by the Russian Deputy Defense Minister on the 17th of January 1945. Wallenberg was taken to Lubyanka prison in Moscow, informed that he was under protective custody and would return to Sweden shortly, yet he never did. The Swedish public was in an uproar. Hundreds of newspaper articles by freed Soviet prisoners and those rescued by Wallenberg were published, inquiring about his disappearance. His arrest proved unlawful, and there was an opportunity to save him, yet the Swedish and United States governments delayed any action. After 12 years of his imprisonment, the Soviet Union made an announcement. Raoul Wallenberg had died on July 17, 1947, in Lubyanka prison. The report received pushback and skepticism from Sweden and the United States. Despite efforts to research his whereabouts, the Soviet Union moved Wallenberg across prisons and mental wards to hide his location. Raoul Wallenberg was reportedly seen in various prisons, including Leningrad, Levertovo, and Vladimir, with some unconfirmed accounts even suggesting he may have been held on Wrangel Island, which was believed to have housed extreme labor camps. Theories, testimonies, and recently declassified government reports even suggest that he may have survived within the Soviet Gulag into the late 1980s. Despite the evidence of survival, several political biases and diplomatic failures prevented the United States and Swedish governments from taking action. In 1973, a request from the Wallenberg family reached the Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. The request asked for the United States to question Soviet authority regarding Raoul Wallenberg's fate in an upcoming meeting in Moscow. It was only discovered in 1789 that the request was denied and never put into action by Kissinger. After fighting for their son's release for more than 34 years, heartbroken, angry, and distraught, Raoul's mother and stepfather took their own lives in December of the same year. 2 years later, in 1981, Raoul Wallenberg was the second person in history to receive honorary citizenship in the United States. This honor gave the government the right to rescue him as a falsely imprisoned citizen in a foreign country. That power, however, was never used. In 1984, the Wallenberg family sued the Soviet Union for false imprisonment and appealed to President Ronald Reagan for support. That February, John G. Roberts, the associate counsel to the president at the time, advised Reagan not to meet with the family's legal defense committee. It can be argued that this decision contributed to the family's loss of the case and their final opportunity to uncover the truth about Raoul Wallenberg's fate. In the silence that followed, his fate remained buried by government error and classification, while his heroism was left tragically unsung. Raoul Wallenberg's extraordinary courage saved tens of thousands of Hungarian Jews from certain death, and his legacy continues to inspire generations committed to justice and human rights. Yet the truth about his fate remains unanswered. The world has celebrated his heroism, but without confronting the painful silence that followed his disappearance. True honor lies not only in remembering his deeds, but in demanding the truth he was denied. Until justice is served and his full story is known, Raoul Wallenberg remains an honored name with an unsung story.
Raoul is or was a great, wonderful human being whose only idea was to help the innocent. And for this, they took him.